The dust of the plains swirled in a chaotic dance, mirroring the frenzy of clashing bronze and desperate cries. Chariots, their wheels scythed, carved bloody paths through infantry ranks, a maelstrom of wood and flesh. Spears splintered against shields, and the guttural roars of men locked in mortal combat echoed under the vast, indifferent sky. This was not just a battle, it was the violent birth of an epic, a moment where the old world was being brutally torn asunder to make way for the new. The very air tasted of iron and fear, a metallic tang that clung to the back of the throat. At stake was the very heart of the largest empire the world had ever known. A civilization stretching from the Aegean Sea to the Indus River, built over centuries, now faced its ultimate reckoning on this single, dusty field. For one side, it was the defense of a legacy, of a god-king's divine right to rule. For the other, it was the culmination of an audacious dream, a quest for glory that bordered on madness. The fate of millions, the future of cultures, and the redrawing of the world map all hung precariously on the outcome of this singular, violent encounter. At the epicenter of this storm, a figure on a magnificent black charger moved with a terrifying grace. Young, with a lion's mane of golden hair and eyes that seemed to burn with an otherworldly fire, he was a tempest in human form. He was not merely a participant in the chaos, he was its conductor, its very soul. His movements were a blur of decisive action, his spear a blur of deadly intent. He fought not with the desperation of a cornered animal, but with the focused fury of a predator, each strike a calculated step towards an inevitable victory. Who was this young conqueror, this whirlwind of ambition who dared to challenge the might of the Persian Empire? What force drove a man from the rugged mountains of Macedonia to the heart of Asia, seeking not just victory but immortality? Could a single will, however strong, truly bend the arc of history to its breaking point and reshape the destiny of continents? This was more than a clash of armies, it was a collision of destinies, a question posed in blood and answered in steel. The young king was Alexander of Macedon, and the battle was Gaugamela. In a stunning display of tactical genius, he shattered the numerically superior Persian army. The Persian king Darius III fled the field, his authority broken, his empire crumbling in his wake. As the dust settled, it revealed not just a battlefield littered with the fallen, but the dawn of a new age. Babylon, the jewel of Mesopotamia, opened its gates to the victor, and Alexander was no longer just a king of Macedonia, he was the undisputed master of Asia. History is not a gentle stream, but a raging torrent, carved by the cataclysmic force of singular moments and the indomitable wills of those who dare to command them. The plains of Gaugamela were not just a site of slaughter, but a crucible where an empire was forged in the fire of ambition, forever altering the course of civilization. One man's dream, fueled by an insatiable hunger for glory, had irrevocably changed the world, proving that the future is often written by the hands of the audacious few. The story begins not with a crown, but with a prophecy whispered in the chambers of a Macedonian queen. Olympias, a woman of fierce ambition and a devotee of mystic cults, claimed that her son was not the progeny of King Philip II, but of Zeus himself, who had come to her in the form of a serpent. This tale, whether truth or fabrication, wrapped the young Alexander in a shroud of divine destiny from his very first breath. It was a potent myth that would follow him across the world, a self-fulfilling prophecy of greatness. From a young age, Alexander was groomed for a destiny beyond the borders of his mountainous homeland. His tutor was none other than the great philosopher Aristotle, who instilled in him a love for knowledge, literature, and the ideals of Hellenic culture. Yet this scholarly education was paired with a brutal martial training under his father, Philip II, a master strategist who had transformed the Macedonian army into the most formidable fighting force of its time. This duality of intellect and iron would become the hallmark of his reign. The assassination of his father, Philip II, thrust a 20-year-old Alexander onto a precarious throne. The kingdom was a cauldron of rebellion, with Greek city-states and northern tribes eager to test the resolve of the young king. But any who expected weakness were met with swift and ruthless force. Alexander marched his army at a blistering pace, crushing rebellions with an efficiency that was as terrifying as it was effective. The city of Thebes, which had dared to defy him, was razed to the ground, its population sold into slavery, a brutal message to the rest of Greece. With Greece pacified through fear and force, Alexander turned his gaze eastward, towards the colossal Persian Empire. It was the fulfillment of his father's grand ambition. to lead a pan-Hellenic crusade against the ancient enemy, to avenge the Persian invasions of Greece a century and a half earlier. But for Alexander, it was more than vengeance. It was a quest for kleos, for immortal glory, a desire to surpass the heroes of myth and carve his name into the annals of eternity. In the spring of 334 BC, Alexander crossed the Hellespont, the narrow strait separating Europe from Asia. It was a moment steeped in symbolism. He cast his spear from his ship into the Asian soil, claiming the continent as his own, a gift from the gods. He visited the ruins of Troy, honoring the heroes of the Trojan War, Achilles in particular, whom he considered his ancestor. This was not just a military invasion, it was a pilgrimage into the heart of legend, with Alexander as the protagonist of a new epic. The first major test came at the Granicus River. The Persian satraps, the regional governors of Asia Minor, had amassed a force to halt the Macedonian advance. Against the advice of his seasoned general, Parmenion, Alexander ordered an immediate and audacious frontal assault across the river and up its steep banks. Leading the charge himself, he plunged into the fray, his distinctive plumed helmet making him an easy target. It was a near-fatal gamble, but it paid off spectacularly. The Persian line broke, and Asia Minor lay open to the conqueror. The Gordian knot, a complex tangle of rope tied to an ancient chariot in the city of Gordium, held a powerful prophecy. Whoever could untie it would become the ruler of all Asia. For centuries, many had tried and failed. Alexander, faced with the challenge, did not bother with the intricate loops and bindings. In a moment of decisive action that would define his approach to all obstacles, he drew his sword and sliced the knot in two. The message was clear: destiny was not something to be unraveled, but to be seized. The Battle of Issus was a masterclass in strategy against overwhelming odds. Trapped in a narrow coastal plain, Alexander's smaller army faced the full might of the Persian host, commanded by King Darius III himself. While the Macedonian left flank under Parmenion held firm against immense pressure, Alexander led his elite companion cavalry in a decisive, angled charge directly at the Persian center. The target was Darius. The sight of the Macedonian king charging towards him caused the Persian monarch to panic and flee, triggering a catastrophic collapse of his army. Following the victory at Issus, the spoils were immense. Darius's own mother, wife, and children were captured. In a gesture of magnanimity that surprised many, Alexander treated them with the utmost respect and courtesy, not as captives but as royalty. This act of chivalry was also a calculated political move. It presented Alexander not as a barbarian plunderer, but as a legitimate and merciful successor to the Persian throne, a stark contrast to the fleeing and defeated Darius. The siege of Tyre was a testament to Alexander's unyielding determination and engineering genius. The island fortress, considered impregnable, refused to surrender. For 7 long months, Alexander's forces undertook a monumental task, building a massive causeway, a land bridge, across the sea to the island's walls. Under constant attack from the Tyrian navy, the Macedonians pressed on, eventually breaching the walls and unleashing a terrible slaughter upon the city's inhabitants. The conquest of Tyre secured the entire eastern Mediterranean coastline. Egypt, a land weary of Persian rule, welcomed Alexander not as a conqueror but as a liberator. The Oracle of Siwat Oasis, a highly respected religious site, proclaimed him the son of the god Amun, the Egyptian equivalent of Zeus. This divine endorsement solidified his legitimacy as the rightful pharaoh. In Egypt, he laid the foundations for a new city at the mouth of the Nile, a city that would bear his name and become one of the greatest centers of learning, culture, and commerce in the ancient world: Alexandria. With the Mediterranean coast secured, the stage was set for the final confrontation with Darius. On the plains of Gaugamela, near the modern-day city of Erbil in Iraq, the fate of the Persian Empire would be sealed. Darius had chosen the ground carefully, a wide, open plain to maximize the advantage of his scythed chariots and vast numbers. He had prepared for months, gathering an army drawn from every corner of his empire, a force that ancient sources claim numbered as many as 1 million men. The night before the battle, a sense of foreboding hung over the Macedonian camp. Parmenion, ever the cautious veteran, advised a night attack to surprise the vast Persian host. Alexander's response was legendary: "I will not steal my victory." He was confident in his tactics, in his men, and in his destiny. He slept soundly, appearing to his commanders the next morning calm and assured, a picture of unshakable resolve that inspired his troops as they prepared for the momentous clash. As the sun rose on Gaugamela, the sheer scale of the Persian army was revealed, stretching for miles across the plain. Alexander, facing this immense force, employed a brilliant and unorthodox strategy. He advanced with his battle line at an oblique angle, seemingly exposing his right flank. This was a deliberate feint, designed to draw the Persian cavalry on their left wing further and further out, creating a gap between them and their own infantry center. Darius, seeing the gap forming, unleashed his elite cavalry to encircle the Macedonian right. This was the moment Alexander had been waiting for. With perfect timing, he led his companion cavalry, held in reserve, in a thunderous charge directly into the weakened Persian center, aiming once again for Darius himself. The maneuver was like a surgical strike, piercing the heart of the Persian formation and throwing it into chaos. History repeated itself as Darius, seeing the tide turn, fled the battlefield for a second and final time. The flight of the king sealed the fate of his army and his empire. Though parts of the Persian force fought on bravely, the news of Darius's desertion spread like wildfire, shattering their morale. What followed was a rout, a complete and utter collapse. The great Achaemenid Empire, the superpower of the ancient world for over 2 centuries, was irrevocably broken in a single day of battle. Alexander marched unopposed into Babylon, Susa, and finally, the ceremonial capital of Persepolis. The city of Persepolis, a treasure trove of the Achaemenid dynasty, was given over to the Macedonian troops. In a controversial act that is still debated by historians, Alexander ordered the burning of the great palace of Xerxes. The official reason was retribution for the burning of Athens during the Persian invasion of Greece. Whether an act of calculated policy or a drunken whim, the destruction of Persepolis symbolized the definitive end of the Achaemenid dynasty and the transfer of power to the new conqueror. With Darius a fugitive, Alexander began the arduous task of conquering the eastern satrapies of the former empire, Bactria and Sogdiana, lands corresponding to modern-day Afghanistan and Central Asia. This was a different kind of war, not of set-piece battles, but of grueling guerrilla warfare against fierce mountain tribesmen. It was here that Alexander's army faced some of its toughest challenges, pushing both men and their commander to their absolute limits in a harsh and unforgiving landscape. The hunt for Darius ended not with a capture, but with a betrayal. The fugitive king was murdered by one of his own satraps, Bessus, who then declared himself the new king. Alexander, in a shrewd political move, gave Darius a royal funeral and cast himself as the avenger of the rightful Persian king. He pursued Bessus relentlessly, eventually capturing him and having him executed in a gruesome Persian manner, solidifying his claim as the legitimate successor to the Achaemenid throne. It was in the remote and rugged province of Bactria that Alexander met Roxana, the daughter of a local nobleman. Captivated by her beauty, he married her in a traditional Sogdian ceremony. This marriage was not just a matter of the heart, it was a crucial political alliance. It helped to pacify the rebellious eastern provinces and was the first major step in his policy of fusion, a plan to merge Macedonian and Persian cultures to create a new, unified elite to rule his vast, multicultural empire. After 3 long and brutal years subduing the eastern provinces, Alexander's insatiable ambition drove him further east, towards the mythical land of India. He crossed the Hindu Kush mountains and descended into the Indus Valley, a land of powerful kingdoms and fabled wealth. His soldiers, many of whom had not seen their homes in years, were entering a world utterly alien to them, a land of strange customs, monsoons, and terrifying war elephants. The greatest challenge in India came at the Indus River, where Alexander faced King Porus, a formidable Indian ruler with a large army and a fearsome contingent of war elephants. The elephants panicked the Macedonian horses, rendering their cavalry advantage moot. In what is often considered his tactical masterpiece, Alexander executed a daring night crossing of the swollen river during a thunderstorm, surprising Porus and defeating his army in a hard-fought battle. Impressed by the courage and dignity of the defeated King Porus, Alexander treated him with great honor. He not only allowed Porus to retain his kingdom, but also added new territories to his rule, making him a valuable ally. This act demonstrated Alexander's ability to turn former enemies into loyal vassals, a key element of his statecraft. However, the victory at the Hydaspes came at a high cost, and the relentless campaigning was taking its toll on his army. At the Hyphasis River, the easternmost edge of the known world for the Greeks, Alexander's army finally reached its breaking point. Exhausted by years of constant warfare, battered by the monsoon rains, and intimidated by tales of even larger armies and more elephants further east in the Ganges plain, his men mutinied. For the first time, Alexander's charisma and powers of persuasion failed him. Reluctantly and with great bitterness, he agreed to turn back. His dream of conquering the entire world had reached its limit. The journey back was an odyssey of suffering. Choosing to explore a new route, Alexander led a portion of his army through the treacherous Jedrosian Desert, a barren and waterless expanse in modern-day southern Pakistan. Thousands of his soldiers, along with their followers, perished from heat, thirst, and starvation. It was a catastrophic miscalculation, a testament to the fact that even the great conqueror was not immune to the unforgiving power of nature. Returning to the heart of his empire in Persia, Alexander was confronted with widespread corruption and mismanagement by the governors he had left in charge. He enacted a ruthless purge, executing several of his satraps to restore order and reassert his authority. He also pushed forward with his policy of cultural fusion, staging a mass wedding at Susa where he and 80 of his senior officers took Persian noblewomen as their wives, a symbolic union of East and West. In Babylon, the new administrative center of his empire, Alexander began to lay plans for future conquests: an invasion of Arabia, a circumnavigation of Africa, and a campaign against the rising powers of the Western Mediterranean, Carthage and Rome. His ambition remained boundless, his vision global. He was not merely a conqueror, but an empire builder on an unprecedented scale, fostering trade, founding cities, and encouraging the spread of Greek culture across his vast domain. But the grand designs were never to be realized. In the summer of 323 BC, after a prolonged bout of heavy drinking at a banquet, Alexander fell gravely ill with a fever. For 12 days he battled the mysterious illness, his body weakening until he was unable to speak or move. On June 10th, in the palace of Nebuchadnezzar II in Babylon, Alexander the Great, the conqueror of the known world, died. He was just shy of his 33rd birthday. The death of Alexander plunged his vast, newly forged empire into immediate chaos. He left no clear heir. His wife Roxana was pregnant, but his son had not yet been born. When asked on his deathbed to whom he left his empire, he is said to have whispered, "To the strongest." This ambiguous decree became a death warrant for his legacy. His powerful generals, the Diadachi, immediately began to vie for power, carving up the empire in a series of brutal wars that would last for decades. The body of the great king became a political pawn. It was hijacked on its way back to Macedonia and taken to Egypt by Ptolemy, one of his most cunning generals, who enshrined it in a magnificent tomb in Alexandria. For centuries, the tomb was a site of pilgrimage, visited by Roman emperors who sought to associate themselves with his legend. The true mystery, however, remains the exact cause of his death. Was it malaria, typhoid fever, excessive alcohol, or something more sinister, like a carefully administered poison? The whispers of conspiracy have echoed through the centuries. Alexander's legacy is as vast and complex as the empire he created. He was a military genius of unparalleled skill, a visionary who sought to create a new world order by blending Greek and Eastern cultures. He founded over 70 cities, many of which became vibrant centers of Hellenistic civilization, spreading Greek language, art, and philosophy across a vast swathe of the globe. His conquests shattered the old world order and ushered in the Hellenistic Age, a period of unprecedented cultural exchange and intellectual ferment. Yet he was also a man of contradictions, capable of great magnanimity and shocking cruelty, a student of philosophy who razed cities and slaughtered thousands. His ambition, while the engine of his success, was also a destructive force that led to immense suffering and ultimately, the fracturing of the very empire he had bled to create. His life was a brilliant, blazing meteor that streaked across the sky of history, illuminating the world for a brief, glorious moment before vanishing into darkness. The empire itself did not survive him. It fractured into several Hellenistic kingdoms ruled by his generals: the Ptolemaic kingdom in Egypt, the Seleucid Empire in Asia, and the Antigonid dynasty in Macedonia. These kingdoms continued his legacy of spreading Greek culture, but were engaged in near-constant warfare with one another. The dream of a unified world, a single empire stretching from Greece to India, died with its dreamer in the fever-racked heat of Babylon. But the legend endures. The story of Alexander the Great has been told and retold for over 2 millennia, a timeless epic of ambition, conquest, and the intoxicating pursuit of glory. He remains the ultimate yardstick against which all subsequent conquerors have measured themselves, a figure who blurred the line between man and myth. His conquest of the East was more than a military campaign. It was a profound and violent collision of civilizations that reshaped the world, creating an empire on 3 continents and a legacy that time has not been able to erase.